If you work in the media industry, you're likely aware of the New York Times' tremendous success with its gaming vertical. In fact, millions of people subscribe solely so they can play games like Wordle and Connections. But it's not the only publisher that's incorporated games into its business strategy. Hundreds of outlets ranging from Morning Brew to The New Yorker utilize a platform called Amuse Labs to build everything from crosswords to sudoku. In a recent interview, co-founder John Temple explained how publishers can leverage games to increase everything including time on site, repeat visits, advertising revenue, and paid subscription conversions. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcast. Okay, let's jump into the interview. Hey, John, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you're now work for a startup, a SaaS startup, but you actually have like a long history in traditional journalism. In fact, you were both a reporter and editor for various newspapers, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I started as a reporter and I've worked as a city editor, managing editor, publisher, VP of news for a EW Scripps company or Scripps newspapers. I also have been in startups. I was the president of First Look Media, and I was also founding editor of Honolulu Civil Beat. So I've done things on both the digital side and the print side. So I have a long history, I would say, in journalism and in particularly in publications.
Yeah, and if you look at traditional print newspapers, leading up into the early 2000s, they were really like bundling a lot of things with news. They had classifieds, which were a huge revenue driver, but also a huge utility for people, who lived locally. There were games and there were comics, there were movie listings and all that kind of thing. And like something that we saw is like there was this great unbundling in some ways, because I think a lot of newspaper publishers just assumed that anybody could just go somewhere else for that, so they kind of uh, did that. Like, would you agree that's kind of the trend that started happening, like leading into the 2010s?
Yeah, I think that's a great overview of what happened to the industry, that the newspaper provided all these different kinds of dimensions in life. These were experiences for people. And then over time that changed and people lost sight of that publications were experiences. You wanted to have some kind of positive emotional connection with them, and games provided a positive emotional connection because you completed something, you overcame a challenge. So games were a really important part of the traditional experience of a newspaper.
Yeah. And so you eventually left like, day-to-day journalism and you went to academics. What did you do after that?
Yeah, well, I was at the Washington Post and I was managing editor in charge of digital as well as in news that served local audiences. And this was 2012, 2013, and I felt like we were underestimating the impact of mobile and what was going to happen with mobile. And I went to Stanford as a senior fellow in the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships Program, and I worked with the computer science department. I really affiliated myself with the computer science department, trying to explore what was possible with mobile. And doing that, I encountered some colleagues who had developed software that I thought if I were still at a publication, I would have loved to have, which was the ability to create crosswords that incorporated audio, video, and images. And so we're truly digitally native. And so we just started playing around with, well, like, what could we do with this to put this tool in the hands of more people? Because our thinking then was we were going to democratize the creation of what we called knowledge games or brain games, because anybody with expertise could create, or passions could create games around them. And that's how we started. And
And that
that's
was in
how,
2014.
yeah, and our company was formed in 2014, and we were all doing other things. I mean, I was working at First Look Media, my colleagues, one was a professor, but we were all exploring, well, what could we do with this kind of software until and we had different we did some things in education and we did some things with personal use, but we found that there was a real need among publishers. And ultimately, in 2017, the Washington Post decided to take control of its crosswords and put out an RFP. And we actually won the RFP as a startup. And suddenly we were responsible for the crosswords at the Washington Post. And that set us on a path to really working with publishers to, to put games online in a way that would bring great pleasure to, large audiences.
So you like you said you built out these capabilities. So this was like basically a platform where it was easy for people. The idea was it would be that people could make their own games, and it wasn't you were making the games and shipping them. It was like just like a publishing CMS allows people to write their own articles or upload their own video or something like that. This was like the games version of it. Is like you could create a grid, like for crosswords, you could create a grid and put an answer key and do all that kind of stuff. Like that was the idea behind it, right?
That's right. I mean, that it was truly, um, we were on the software side thinking that we were giving people a tool that they could do something with that would, let them express their creativity. And just to give you an idea why this took off was really my colleagues were using it to teach Indian classical music. They were looking for a way to teach children Indian classical music, and a game like, how do you recognize a note? What are the instruments? All these kind, like sound, and then video, audio, images. And once I saw that potential, I thought, well, if I was in Portland which is a city of roses, I could do games about roses every month, about what's happening in the world of roses. And if I was somewhere else, I could do something different. And I just saw great potential in sort of opening the door to game creation.
Yeah. And was it always like envisioned as like a white label product, or was there ever discussion of just having your own website that's where you drove people to make games and share games, like almost like a traditional social media site, and you could just monetize them on the site, or was it always going to be some kind of white label product that you sold to outside companies?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, truthfully, we didn't know, but the problem we we found a need ultimately and sort of met that need. And it was that games are much more complicated. Like a game platform is much more complicated than it looks. And it's unrealistic to think that every publisher can do what the New York Times has done and build a huge games team and build a sophisticated games platform. But a games platform that serves many people and that where you develop and you learn from use cases from all these different users seemed much more like a viable path to us where we could reach many more people, help many more publications, rather than being a destination site where we were trying to monetize based on advertising. We were trying to give people a powerful tool to do interesting creative things.
And what kind of game capabilities did your site have early on? Like what kind of games could you build?
Really, we just started with crossword. Because crossword, I mean, just to emphasize about crossword, it's really the core game. People love crosswords, and there's something about it that we find that typically just a very popular game with a lot of habit built in. But then we quickly went to word search and Sudoku. And word search, one of the benefits of our word search is that we can use visual clues. So, like for example, Morning Brew will do word searches, aerial views of a city, and you guess the city. You find the city name in the grid of letters, or subway maps, and you find the city name in the grid of letters. So with visual word search, and then Sudoku, because Sudoku is a very popular game and we could use the computer science expertise of our team to develop a tutor, not to so that to teach people how to get better at the game, which is something we could bring to it because a lot of times reveal and assists are just giving you the answer. We didn't want to give you the answer. We wanted to teach people how to get better at the game so they felt more capable and they could try to do more demanding versions. And we also created a visual version of Sudoku, which is called Picdoku, which is so you could, which is kind of like very fun and lighthearted, where you can have football helmets or emoji instead of numbers. And we also had a wordoku, which is letters. So we did a lot of playful things around those core games, and now we've built out to about a dozen games. And plus, we do build with partners custom versions of games.
And like, do you have your own game designers so that if a publisher just wants a very low effort, you know, embed of like not have to like come up with their own game designs all the time, like do you have your own versions of games that they can just use?
Yes, we do. So we've become like a sort of a complete content company as well as a software company to a degree today. Our view is that publishers know their audience better than we do, and so it's best for them to be thinking about content that's appropriate for their audience. Like the New York Post and the New Yorker both work with us. They've got different readerships and different interests in terms of how they, but they're on the same platform. So we do provide content to people, and that's very valuable. We don't. We try to think of ourselves as a platform that people can use for standard games instead of like custom instances, because that can be very expensive to create custom instances of only one publication is using this one game in a limited sphere. But we have ideas moving forward how our architecture could be the platform that people use to build upon.
And how does a client work with you? Like how's that relationship work?
That's a great question. So we have multiple levels. First, our software is free to use for teachers and, like for small non-commercial uses. So we learn a lot from just average people going onto the site and creating games, and they can do that.
So if
Then
like
we
a
have,
biology teacher wants to create some kind of crossword puzzle based on whatever,
yeah,
curriculum she's teaching and print that out and hand it out to the class, she can use your platform to create that game.
and we're integrated into Google Classroom and things, so they can even do it online. And we have social play, so multiple kids could play on, like if they had phones, they could play the same game together on devices. And teachers use us already for quizzes, like we have quiz software. We have anatomy professors in medical schools because there's a lot of memorization in medical schools. So all kinds of use cases like that. So that's sort of like a basic free level. Then what we have is what we call professional. It's a self-serve level where there's a monthly fee and a certain size of number of gameplays that we support. And that is really, you can just, somebody can sign up, use Stripe, and then we, there's a themer where they can design their games within the platform. They can basically manage their entire game portfolio. So that could be used by companies for employee training. It could be used for uh, uh, culture building at a company. It could be used by, I mean, we have a brewery that put like games on the beer cans. We wine newsletters, all kinds of different things that we see on that sort of professional level. And then we have an enterprise level, and the enterprise
So the
level,
professional level, I'm guessing, is for like what are kind of the upper limits of someone using that level in terms of the number of like gameplays they can do?
like 20, 25,000 a month, 20,
Okay, so if you're a
15,000 a
small
month.
regional newspaper, you could probably just use that because you're probably not going to get more than that a month, right?
Right. Like we're very proud to work with some of the like local news sites. Like we work with Lookout Santa Cruz and Lookout Eugene now. We work with the Daily Memphian. We really love the idea that it should be easy to use, and I think it is easy to use our platform so that a publication without a deep technical bench should be able to adopt our platform, implement it because it's an iframe. It's just an iframe dropped onto a web page in many of these cases.
Yeah,
And
so
then,
there's like some kind of code that they're copying onto their own website, and it's
right,
just pulling, like it's almost like embedding something from your servers onto their
onto
website,
their
right?
page. So
Yeah.
basically, in this case, these companies, they don't have to support the game itself. They're supporting the container page around the game, and they can put advertising and messaging around the game, but they can control the content in the iframe, but it's being served by us.
And what kind of analytics do they have access to?
Deep analytics. I mean, this software comes out of my two co-founders are really sophisticated technologists. They both had been at Sun. The CEO is a PhD in computer science from Stanford, and the CTO is, it's a master's degree in computer science. So there's an expectation of deep analytics, and we provide our partners with a dashboard and reports or reports. I mean, different ones work differently, and they can see, how many people uh, started a game, how long it took, what was the average time, how many people, what percentage completed the game. Um, so there's a lot of analytics, and it can be in real time, and by the way, anyone can log into our site, amuselabs.com, and with their social login, Gmail or Facebook, and see the analytics. And while they won't, basically anybody can access and see the kind of analytics we provide.
Mhm. And so tell me about, like, obviously the elephant in the room here is in the New York Times. Like,
Yeah,
they have not only an incredibly successful, crosswords, puzzle games, but like they've invented their own games, Wordle. They acquired Wordle.
yeah.
And they credit that with being a huge driver of traffic and repeat visits and subscriptions. What do we know about what happens to a publisher when they go from having no games to having games? Like, what does that do based on any case studies you've run, or maybe you've done like more kind of grand analytics across all your sites? Can you talk about like what the opportunity there is there from like an engagement perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously the Times does an incredible job, and we really respect what they do. And in fact, just as an interesting aside, Will Shortz, who's the puzzle editor for the New York Times, he runs the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament every year, and that virtual tournament is actually supported by Amuse Labs. And so we actually work with Will Shortz on a non-New York Times project. The number one thing that games provide is engagement and loyalty. What we see is that the average time for a game, like a typical American crossword, could be like 15 minutes. So a visit to a normal news site might be 2 minutes. A game visit might be 15 minutes for a crossword. Now, for Wordle, it might be 2 or 3 minutes. For a Sudoku, it could be anywhere from, like it could even be like more than 15 minutes. It depends on the difficulty of the Sudoku. So number one is engagement. There's no question. The other is habit. What we see publishers knowing that their churn, their retention of subscribers is higher for those subscribers who play games versus those who do not, because they've got a reason to come that has some emotional connection to them. And so if people play games on a site, you're much more likely to have repeat visits, and the games can then be a window into the site. And there's a lot of ways we can help drive, expose people to what else is on the site. So I'd say that, engagement, retention, and then frankly, revenue. Look, I come out of journalism. Journalism has been um, deeply challenged, the economic model. And one of the things with games is that the solver is on a page for a long time and can be exposed to ads, and they're not disruptive because they're outside the game interface. And so they're not disruptive the way they can be in an article or when they're flopping over things. And so we have publishers who really look to generate a profit that can be used to support their journalism, they or that can be used to drive subscriptions. And some, like, take the Boston Globe. They put some games, a game, their key crossword is behind their paywall. It's only for subscribers, and other games are outside. Advanced Local, which publishes NewJersey.com and other uh, local sites, has different ways of having some games outside a paywall, some games behind a paywall. So it can there's a lot of strategic things you can do. So engagement, revenue, and of course loyalty or and retention. Those are major drivers for people with games.
And to kind of translate or expand upon, like there's publishers have found a strong correlation between repeat visitors and higher conversion rates and lower churn. So kind of what you're talking about is that like it creates a daily habit, people who visit a news website 20 times a month versus one times a month are just less likely to cancel their membership. So there are just like all kinds of, you know, like good effects that come out of games because they just cause people to just spend more time on the site, which has all kinds of other downstream kind of revenue impacts, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we have one publisher in Europe that is a paywall publisher and studied the retention impact of users who play games and users who don't. And there's a difference in the churn, and that difference has value because acquiring a customer is a cost to a publisher. So they have to look at that as each new subscriber costs us X to acquire. And if we don't have to acquire new customers and we can build on our base more rapidly, that has tremendous value to us. And so yeah, they see value in the games.
And obviously, a big game that you can do is quizzes. Do you guys provide quiz functionality?
Yeah, and in fact, like quiz is a format that people really recognize and they enjoy. I've actually been shocked by how popular quizzes are because I have bad memories from childhood of being in classrooms and being quizzed and being, either embarrassed because I couldn't get the answer right or whatever. But quizzes are really popular, and we as a software company, we're working very hard on the AI side to make it possible for people who don't have game creation expertise to create quizzes, crosswords, and word searches at this point using AI, using our AI to generate from URLs, from articles, from documents, so it's contextual or a theme or a topic. And it's shocking how good it has become over time to the point where I've generated personally quizzes that have been accepted by major companies as, okay, that's a direction we like. Yeah, that's really good. It was generated by AI, me work using our AI just to generate the quiz. So quiz has a lot of potential. And of course, you can incorporate audio and visuals and video into quiz as well. And so they can be very responsive and fun.
So, what kind of advice would you give for someone who's like launching games and want to start funneling their audience into games to like what are some ways that they can kind of expose them to them?
There's some best practices. I would say first, keep it simple to begin with and learn over time. Don't try to solve all the problems at once. Start with the things that people would expect that they know, like things like a little crossword or a word search or a sudoku, just basic things to get started, to start collecting data and to see how people respond to them. I wouldn't be afraid, for a publisher, like this is typically very safe content. So advertisers like it because they're not going to be running into, news is by nature often very troubling. It's not a great advertising environment. Games are a good advertising environment. So keep it simple. Um, and make sure that you include the presence of games in, visually on your homepage. Include games in the newsletters. Newsletters are very strong drivers of games, and they don't have to detract. You can have a newsletter that today's news, you get to the end of the newsletter, here's today's game is like Morning Brew does a brilliant job of this. Morning Brew uses our software. They're a great partner. They put a game or games at the bottom of their newsletter every day, and they're among the most clicked on items every day in those newsletters. But they're not like why you start the newsletter. But when you get to the end, you go, oh yeah, okay, I kind of caught up, but now I want to have some fun. And there's a game, and away they go, and people go and play the game from Morning Brew.
And like, what are the analytics you can show the user, like in terms of how they rank and stuff like that? Because
Yeah,
obviously
that's
that
great.
adds further gamification to it.
That's a great question. So, we found that streaks is I mean, people want to know how long it took them, that kind of thing. And that streaks is a very powerful driver because people want to know, did I do it again today? Did I do it yesterday? Oh, did I miss yesterday's? I can go back and get yesterday's. The challenge with leaderboards, is that, people anonymize, so they take up these crazy names. People don't know who they are, and it's very unusual to have a deep leaderboard. So people sit at the top of leaderboards. So we don't see. I mean, it would require quite a sophisticated strategy, which we could work on with people for leaderboards. But we think streaks is super important. And also, frankly, recognition that it's me, John, who came to the game today, and I'm on my desktop. But by the way, I went for lunch at a restaurant, and now I'm playing the same game on my phone, and I'm continuing where I was on my desktop. So that portability across devices, is really, really important. That feeling like that no matter where I am in the environment of whether it's New York Magazine, Vulture, wherever I am in that environment, I can play the game and continue the game. So that's another really important thing that the person feels that the game is sort of connected to them.
So, like, did you have to build integrations into a CMS so that the game can track a logged in user and keep track of their streaks, or if they're logging in from a different uh, device with an unfinished game? Like, what was the how hard was that from a technical lift?
So I always hesitate to be the guy answering technical questions because I'm not a technologist. But the
Mhm.
key thing is that we don't keep any personally identifiable information. We don't have any. We get a hashed or anonymized user identification from a publisher. So if a publisher has that information because the person gave them their email or the person is a subscriber, we know that identity perfectly. Then of course cookies, but cookies are being eroded, right? The value of cookies is being eroded. So we really encourage the passing of anonymized UIDs to us that we can then um, give back to the publisher. Like we know that this is John. Here's what John did, and they have that information. And we think that the publisher should be managing the relationship with their customer, not us. We should be supporting them to do so. But just like the customer knows its content, the customer knows what kind of messaging and voice and relationship it wants with its user. And they can do that using these anonymized UIDs, user
And then
identification.
going back to the rankings, like there's the
Yeah.
leaderboard, but then there's also like the New York Times tells you what percentile of people who took the quiz that day you were in. And then I think Slate's is even more sophisticated because each quiz is timed. So your score is based on not just what questions you got correct, but how fast you did them. Do you offer that kind of functionality?
Those are all things like there's a number that you've raised there. We explore with publishers all kinds of functionality. Uh, the one, so the short answer is yes, we can do those kinds of things with publishers. the complication with anything that's competitive is cheating. Like, let's say I solve the puzzle on one browser, and then I go to another browser, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, because I want to be like the best kind of thing. So there there is the potential for cheating in that world. We support contests and we do work with publishers and we support live events. Like we work with a great group out of Boston called Boss Words that puts on tournaments. And in those particular cases, there is no assist feature, and those people are submitting to be evaluated, on their performance. So there's a lot of functionality that we can provide, whether it's contests or these other things to enhance the experience of the users for publishers, depending on what the publisher's goals are.
Have you seen any examples of publishers using games in like unique ways to like with their advertising partners or anything like, there's an upcoming or like a local car dealership wants to sponsor, so you create like a crossword puzzle that's based on like Carfax or something, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really glad you bring that up. The truth is, yes. And we have a whole arm that works on what we call gamified ads. And for example, we just did an ad for with The Atlantic, which is a great partner of ours, for Netflix for it was a new streaming series starring Robert De Niro and called Zero Day. And so Netflix wanted a crossword related to the show, and they wanted a quiz uh, related to the show. And we worked with The Atlantic to produce ads, gamified ads that appeared on The Atlantic's website around that show. And so we have a whole sort of arm that we're working on what we call gamified ads. And we think that's a lot of a potential because what's happened in the digital world is everyone is a publisher and everybody wants engagement. They want direct engagement with their product or their expertise or their service. So we've done things for Duolingo, Shopify, and we see a lot of potential in games in ads because it's a way to deepen engagement with ads, just as it's a way to deepen engagement with a website.
Mhm. What about like any other kind of outside the box thinking of how like publishers use games in some like unique way? Can you think of anything
Yeah,
beyond just like standard like news or like trivia?
well, I would say there's some really innovative. Evan Bernholtz at the Washington Post really pushes the boundaries of our software and does amazing things with crosswords. His crossword runs every Sunday in the Post. So I think he's an example of someone who's doing really surprising things sometimes. We've seen I was just talking to the Toronto Globe and Mail today, and the Toronto Globe and Mail publishes this huge uh, Christmas crossword at the end of the year. It's like 100 by I don't know, it's like 100 by 100, something like that, just this giant grid. And we actually made it playable on the phone. So you
Mhm.
could scroll, and when you got to a grid square, the clue popped up right there. And that crossword, which is kind of like getting a 1,000-piece jigsaw or something, was really popular. And so these pushing the format to do something really strange. And then, so that's another example of somebody doing something really interesting, I think. And we see Morning Brew does like they'll play around and do interesting things where we have a game called Decipher, which is it's a grid game where you find a quote in a grid of letters and squares, and what Morning Brew does then is it surfaces like pop culture things like a quote from a famous video film, and it just feels like really fun and unexpected compared to what you think of as a black and white grid of crossword or a Wordle where you just enter, you know, the letters. Like we have a version of I call Wordle a guess the word game. We have a version that allows you to enter phrases or titles, so it's not limited to 5 letters, and so it can really emphasize the expertise or the area of interest of a publication. So those are kind of fun things that people do. New York Post does an amazing thing where they have you complete guess the headline for their front page every day by showing you the front page without the headline and just having the wordles. So people come up with all kinds of unusual ways of playing with the software.
Oh, like, can you do like caption contests or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I like caption contests, and I think the New Yorker has a funny one with
Yeah.
cartoons, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think we could. I think that's a little bit like um, the caption contests are freestyle, right? They're
Hmm.
not find the written caption. It's
Yeah.
like come up with your own caption.
Yeah.
We support freestyle quizzes and multiple choice quizzes, so we can do freestyle. But freestyle introduces some complications. So I'd have to talk to the software team and about like the dev team about, could we do guess the come up with a caption contest? But that's kind of fun. And especially people could vote on it, right? People
Yeah, so
could,
like I could see like a daily feature where you show some goofy photo, people
yeah.
write in captions, and then the next day people vote on the previous day's photo, but then they also have a new photo that they can enter in captions for, and you just have them right above each other and every single day. It seems like that would generate a lot of engagements. It's
Uh,
basically what the New Yorker does, but like you wouldn't have to do a custom drawn cartoon every single time.
yeah, I mean, do we have that game today? Like, is somebody doing that? No. Could we develop something like that? I think so, because it almost sounds like a Google form. Like
Yeah,
people
yeah.
could
That's what I
enter,
was thinking, a Google form, yeah.
yeah, you could
And then
enter,
just having a poll after, the next day.
right, and you'd have a filter that would eliminate profanity, and
Yeah.
you'd have to have some things, and you'd probably have to have a review of them because people put in goofy things that to get around filters.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be really fun.
Yeah. So speaking of custom, like
Yeah.
obviously the New York Times famously invents its own games that have its
Yeah.
own rules and its own design and graphics and stuff like that. It sounds like if a publisher is paying you enough money, you will develop like custom things for them. Like what's the options there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a great example is Merriam-Webster. Merriam-Webster is well, one, it's a great publication, and they have a really strong games franchise, and they were known, right? Merriam-Webster's word games. That's why would you go to a dictionary site or a word site? And so um, uh, we created a special crossword with them called Missing Letter, where there's one letter that's not used, and you discover that letter. And there, a couple of things. They have the scale that they can have a unique game, and it's supportable by us because we're only supporting it for one customer rather than supporting it for many. And two, they're really capable. Like game design is not an insignificant effort. And they have the DNA and the leadership to really push to get something that really reflects their brand. So I think for most sites, it's better to focus on the content of known game
Yeah.
formats. For major sites, with the Washington Post, we created a special game. They have a special game called Mini Meta. It's a mini crossword that has a meta answer on at the end of the week.
Hmm.
And that answer is actually in the form of a type of word search functionality. So it's an interesting development. But the Washington Post is a major publication with a huge audience, and it can have an exclusive game like that. I would recommend for most publications to focus on what they know best. Like if I'm in, um, any community, what are the things that people really care about here? What are the things people are passionate about? Whether it's, if I'm in Napa Valley, the various vineyards and various wines, and if I brought up Portland and roses, um, you know, think about the content rather like, for example, Vulture or Daily Beast, they have excellent crosswords that are really relevant to their publications and their audiences. So to me,
Yeah, Vulture
that's
has some
better.
kind of like celebrity, like some kind of matrix, right? Something celebrity matrix or
Yeah, they
something.
do. And that's a game that we don't support, that they support, but but that's an example where they're really thinking about their identity and it's a simple game. But we're also sort of looking at opening up our platform so that people can use the back end of our platform and build a game on top of it. So that
Interesting.
will be coming in coming months so that because there's a lot of complexity to this and we hope to see more innovation that way and make innovation possible that we won't have to imagine, that others will imagine and build on top of. Our software is called Puzzle Me.
Yeah, I feel like there are a couple. So it seems like you are kind of saying like you really don't have the resources to truly test out and get enough scale on a game that you should be using known templates. Like the New York Times, they famously, anytime they roll out a game, they do testing on it first to see if it's addictive, and they'll only show it to a small percentage of their audience, and then they'll do a larger rollout. But for most publishers, they're better off just like having something with the set rules that people are used to, right? That's kind of what you're saying there.
I am, and I'm saying that, but then tweak the content to be appropriate. If I'm in Louisiana, I'm going to have different content than if I'm in Seattle, and I should be able to, you know, there can be things about history, even Jigsaw. Jigsaw is a fun game of people like to take a picture, break it apart, and put it back together. We do it on we do it on tabletop. Well, we support Jigsaw in on mobile and tablet and desktop. And the fun of Jigsaw is that can be uniquely local in most publications, whether if they're a geographic publication, they have great pictures and they can celebrate their place. And people, they could even link from the game to an article about the image or that related to the image. And so there's simple things that they can do to make games feel native to to their to their location or to their identity as a publication, whether it's music or fashion or whatever. One of the things I think that's really kind of important that we've done, and I wanted to make sure I explained to you, and it goes to this local thing, is we we're not a games arcade where people feel like they're taken away from the identity of the publication and they go off to some Coney Island and then they come back to the publication. We seamlessly integrate. So with the fonts, the look and feel, the type, the colors. So, the New Yorker, the New York Post, and the Washington Post are all on the same platform, but they look and feel completely differently. And so a local publisher or a music publisher or a photo publisher, etc., they can make the site feel very true to their identity. And so it's not like it's some separate thing about games, and then the content can be built on top of that too.
So looking ahead, obviously the gaming industry is worth hundreds of billions of
Yeah,
dollars, and
yeah.
they have like some of the most sophisticated artists and engineers making it. Obviously, the Washington Post isn't going to have their own version of like Halo or something or
Right.
Grand Theft Auto, but like how far do you think they can push the innovation, 5, 10 years from now? Like, what are you hoping
Yeah.
that there will be capabilities for then that maybe don't really exist now?
That's a great question. I think it comes back to me to interactivity between it comes back to interactivity. Like I want to do something. I want to have action and I want to have a reaction and I want to feel like there's a connection and that there's a response and everything so I think interactivity, and I think AI is going to drive this, where like we're seeing AI creation potentially, grow like exponentially, and then the ability of people to imagine things that they wouldn't have imagined before. And I think gamified content overall, I think people are get tired of headline, deck, article, headline, deck, article. There's only so much of that you can consume. People, and we see that that's why one of the reasons video is so popular. So I think the interactivity of games could infiltrate or become part of the whole content experience of sites and make it much more imaginative, much more playful, whether it's like um, like take dinosaur, like let's say you were in, like a dinosaur uh, state or region, like Alberta, Canada is famous for dinosaurs. What could you do with dinosaurs in games that would make it feel like, wow, this is coming to life in a way that it didn't before? And I think we have to think about ways to make content come to life and be more engaging for people, because that's what games do is people, it's immersive, uh, it's a break. Um, and I think that's where we're heading. I wish I could tell you what it'll all look like, but I do think it'll be more interactive and more imaginative and more integrated into the everyday experience, that there'll be more gamifying of experience.
Mm. So, like, a place like Morning Brew allowing you to pick your own stocks or something like that, and then compete against other people with this like imaginary play money or something like that. Is that kind of what you're?
Absolutely. I
Or
think
like
that's
a
the
article about the budget, the federal budget allows you to like balance. Like I remember there was a tool
that's
like
right.
15 years ago that the New York Times did
Yeah,
where you could balance the budget yourself by
right.
decreasing this or increasing this tax rate or something like that. So things like that are you kind of talking about?
Yeah, I think there's going to be more of that. I
Yeah.
think there's going to be more of that because it puts the user in a position of greater agency and power, and I think uh, people enjoy that.
Okay, John, those were all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
We're at amuselabs.com, just spelled just like it sounds. And we welcome people coming to the site, and they can use their social login, Gmail or Facebook, to log in and create their own game and publish it. And then potentially, if for commercial purposes, they'll find plans there. But everything is at amuselabs.com.
All right. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's really fun to talk about with somebody who's been thinking about this. So thanks.